Hi everyone, I'm Connie Loizos. I write a daily e-newsletter called StrictlyVC that's sort of tailored for investors and entrepreneurs and tries to give them all the news they need to start the day. A lot of people are reading it. If you are not, I hope you'll consider signing up. And with me I have these four great panelists. We have Andre Gharakhanian, who is the founder of the legal firm Silicon Legal Strategy, and he was formerly an attorney with Oryx Emerging Companies Practice. Beside him is Mike Walsh of StrictlyVC, which is a seed stage fund, and Mike is one of the lucky people who was smart enough to invest in Uber back in 2010. Next to Mike is Paige Craig, who is an LA-based super angel, who is was an investor in Clout and Plancast and lots of other things that he can tell you about. And last we have Jim Andelman, who is the co-founder of Rincon Venture Partners in Santa Barbara, which he founded about 10 years ago. And before that, Jim had previously headed up software investing at Broadview Capital Partners. So today we're going to be talking about pro-rata rights, which means, of course, that investors get to keep investing in subsequent rounds after they've backed a deal. And the idea is to explore the question of whether it's a privilege or a right. So I don't know if anybody wants to start. Maybe Jim, we'll start with you. Is there sort of a certain kind of threshold, an ownership stake at which you think investors should automatically get a pro rata right?
So pro rata rights are typically part of a VC financing, a preferred stock financing. There is frequently a provision called a major investor threshold. So, and it's sort of arbitrarily chosen, but call it 250K or 500K, where anyone who invests more than that gets a certain set of rights, and they're often information rights, right of first refusal, co-sell rights, and pro rata rights is often included in that set of things that major investors get that others don't. And there's I think historically, the rationale was to make sort of the administrative burden on founders easier, or maybe that was the excuse. And the real reason was for the VCs who were setting the terms kept more value for themselves. There are legitimate reasons to sort of restrict things like information rights, because if you have 60 people on your cap table and you're a private company and you want to keep your stuff private, if someone is sort of a passive investor, not really active, doesn't feel sort of identity and attachment to the company, then they might have loose lips, and it might make sense to restrict some of that.
So anyone on the panel have any other feelings that investors should automatically get these rights, or?
I think there's definitely been sort of a change in the overall sentiment among angels. And this is probably a function of angels being a lot more active, smaller funds being a lot more active, having maybe a little bit more enhanced kind of investment theses, operationally more grown up, and really wanting to maintain their ownership. And so you have that sort of fact in terms of how angels and investors are behaving, and then you have companies that are just raising a lot of money, delaying going public. And as an angel investor who's not just sort of putting your money in for fun, if you really have an investment thesis, I think you're more and more concerned about your investment just being swallowed up. And so you just see a lot more sort of clamoring for it, a lot more pressure on entrepreneurs to be able to lower that threshold, where maybe 4 years ago, in a $2 million seed, you had to put in $500,000. To be able to get major investor rights. Now it's 25,000 sometimes, or if not all investors being able to get them. And also, as soon as the prior smaller investors know that a deal is happening, they start clamoring because they sort of have to hustle to be able to have the entrepreneur go to bat for them to make sure they can be involved in that round.
Speaking, what can investors do who want to maintain their pro rata rights? I mean, the founder's obviously in a very bad position sometimes. The VCs don't want to, carve out enough of a stake for the angels. What can be done, practically speaking? Paige?
Yeah, the key thing I've done when I want to re-up in a deal is to ask the founder, to let them know ahead of time that, I really want to be involved in the next round. And I've done that this year a couple times where I had no rights, but I've been helpful and stay close to them. I know most of my founders pretty well. So the key thing where I've made mistakes is I didn't ask, or I didn't let them know ahead of time that I wanted to be involved in the next round. Because quite often I just don't have pro rata rights, so I have to ask for them. And you don't get what you don't ask for in life.
Yeah, we had 17 companies that raised the next round where pro rata came into question over the last 12 months or so. And to Paige's point, a couple times it was just plain old my fault. I didn't know that they were raising because we weren't close enough to them. In other cases, there's just not enough equity in the round. And and there are 3 partners in our fund now, and we've all been founders. Or at least 3 of us have started and sold companies, and 2 of us have had bad investor experiences. And we feel that it's hard enough being a CEO and a founder, and that we want to support the founders. So we try to get pro rata every time, at least have the ability to. And sometimes we'll get less than pro rata because the next round investors, usually the Series A, will drop their, they'll make some room available so that it doesn't take too much equity from the founders, but it lets the current investors in the round.
That sort of interpersonal component, I think, is huge. That investors can't rely on what's in the documents. Sometimes even you'll be in a situation where there is a $100,000 threshold for pro rata rights, but some investor who only put in 25 negotiates in a side letter that they're going to have their own pro rata rights. Even with that side letter, I think the reality is when you have the forces of new investor needs to own X percentage of the company, previous leads want to have something, a bunch of smaller investors want to have something, the entrepreneur is trying to deal with all these constituencies. In the end, they need to go to bat for you. Borrowing a phrase from Manu at K9, people say, oh, is there a right or a privilege? Manu, his belief is that they're earned. That you sort of earn your pro rata rights as a smaller investor. If you can show a lot of value add, the entrepreneur is a hell of a lot more likely to go to bat for you and carve out some space. Because they're really the one that kind of has to do it. Like even if you have a side letter, you're never going to, as an investor, particularly as an angel investor, you're never going to sue the company because they failed to give you those contractual pro rata rights.
Well, and the other part of it is sometimes you have pro rata rights in the docs, but they can be voted away by a majority of that early round investors, so you lose those pro rata rights. And again, if you've got the relationship, then you can work with the entrepreneur and the other investors, the new investors, to participate.
Yeah, I think the right, even if you have it as an investor, is a starting point for a negotiated outcome. In the companies where you most want to employ your pro rata right, when you want to invest the most in the follow-on, that's usually when it's the hardest, right? When those rounds are most oversubscribed. And if I as an investor is sitting there sort of exerting my pro rata rights, I'm contributing to the problem that the founder is faced with. And I don't think that's a role that any investor can play successfully for too long in this day and age. So I think it's important to have them so that, again, the shared understanding between you and the founder is that these rights exist and that they have been conferred in the past. But you as an investor should also be prepared to back off them if it's necessary to help get a deal done. In the past year, we've had companies where I'm on the board raised $20 million from Excel, $13 million led by Kleiner, $11.5 million led by Sequoia. In each case, the rounds were oversubscribed. Those new investors wanted 100% of the round, and it was a sort of a protracted negotiation to find a path that worked for everyone. And in every one of those cases, we treated the small preferred investors equally to the way we treated ourselves. And so that I think is best practice. It's not, not everyone adheres to it, but unquestionably the very best way to get, what you want is have founders who are internally motivated, not externally motivated, to look out for you because you've been helpful to them along the way. And that's really your very best, that gives you your very best shot at getting what you want over the life cycle of the company, sort of being in partnership with them, helping them solve problems. And then when there are opportunities for them to go to bat for you, they more likely will.
You know, so pro rata, this has been an issue forever, although it's worsened given the sort of heated seed stage environment. But everything is so much more transparent now, and people are bitching on social media much more now about things like pro rata rights than they ever were. So, you talk about sort of, investors having to be flexible and not be a problem. Are you seeing VCs showing? I mean, are they sort of more flexible in the past, or than they may have been in the past because they don't want that reputational damage, or is that just not? That's just not going to happen.
It kind of depends who the smaller investors are. I think everyone's concerned about reputation. I think if it's, does a larger institutional investor care about screwing over the founder's uncle? Probably less so than screwing over like respected smaller investors. So I think there's a calculus that probably goes in there every time.
Yeah, I frankly I've been investing for 20 years, but only 18 months as a VC, so I just don't have enough data to answer that specific question. But I just wanted to comment too that I think Mark Suster's blog really describes his approach and the approach that I've been seeing quite a bit with next round VCs, which is to sort of include in the paperwork that the majority shareholder in that new round has the ability to offer pro rata rates or some pro rata to the earlier investors. So the main point I wanted to make is have a look at that blog. It's got a lot of great insights in it.
Yeah, I think in practice, pro rata rights end up getting waived as a part of every financing so that you can avoid the onerous process of executing pro rata rights the way they're written into docs. And the way you get them waived is to negotiate something that everyone can live with in terms of allocations. But that's always been true, that generally a majority of the preferred can vote to amend the docs in any way they please. And so as a small investor, and when we as a firm come in, we typically sort of lead or co-lead these post-seed rounds. We might be the majority, but then after the next round, we're not. So I personally experience both sides of that, where I can be the one who defines what's going on, or I end up being taken along for the ride. So it makes sense to strike something that's fair and balanced. It makes sense for a majority to be able to adjust these things, because otherwise, if you have 16 people that all have veto rights on a deal is never going to happen. So one of the ways that angel investors can, I think, believe they can sort of lock in pro rata rights and information rights and not have them taken away is through the side letter mechanism that Andre suggested. And it's been tempting for me to do, to make sure that these bigger investors that I don't necessarily have a relationship, a strong relationship with yet, where they'll be looking out for me, where I'm concerned they might take away those rights that are important to me. And I've sort of decided against it because it can put a company in a tight situation where there's sort of, you're stuck between, two people who won't budge. I think it's healthier for a company to minimize the number of people who can block sort of anything that makes sense for the company to do. So I would encourage founders out there to avoid those side letters, even if it seems like it makes sense at the time.
I think it also puts the founder in an awkward position, and they may not know it at the time, but I'd be pissed if I saw other investors in the same stage that had those side letters.
And you weren't treated the same.
And I wasn't treated the same way, yeah.
I imagine this doesn't happen very often, but what happens when you don't want to take your pro rata? I'm assuming in those cases, those are probably companies that are not being chased after heavily by Series A investors, but does it happen sometimes?
Yeah.
And does it?
It happens a lot. The worst deals I've done are like my red flags. If a founder really, 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 really wants me in a deal, and they hit me up quite frequently to be in the pro rata.
Okay.
There's usually something wrong because the best deals, they're not asking the little angel to come take his pro rata. And I've done 3 up rounds in my early years where I learned I made my own rules. So that's one thing that's happened. But quite often as an angel, there's very little signaling risk for me not to do
Is that right?
pro rata. It's definitely a bigger signal if Jim doesn't take his pro rata. If Jim doesn't want to take his pro rata, right?
You know, for us, I mean, as a firm, we aspire to be founders' sort of first call when they have a question or wrestling with an issue. A time in a company's life cycle when we can be most helpful is during a financing. So when we come in initially, we commit to founders that we won't try to do more than our pro rata unless they ask us to. That way they can trust us and we can be actively involved and help founders execute great follow-on financings. And so we're a small fund by design. We want to be overweighted on the earliest stages in a company's life cycle. We are also a bit of a life cycle investor, so we are designed to invest in sort of the first 3 rounds of a company's life, but in decreasing amounts. So generally, we do take less than our pro rata. And it's by design, and it's explicit, and it's clear, but we almost always participate.
I also wanted to ask, what happens when you can't afford pro rata, which I'm sure is probably the case with a lot of people in the audience. Does it make sense to turn to, if you have a seed stage fund, your LP? Does it make sense to turn to AngelList and create a syndicate? Are you seeing, more of one solution than the other?
We're seeing our investor clients turn to their LPs to set up special purpose vehicles when they're super hot on a company. Sometimes they raised a smaller fund and there's no more dry powder, but they have a great relationship with the company. They really believe in the company, and so yeah, we're definitely seeing a lot of these sidecar funds. That sidecar is not the best way to describe it, but special purpose vehicle funds.
And as an angel, you can, I've done this, you can set up an SPV for your very first investment when you do that seed round. That way, because you can't insert that SPV later, that's usually going to get stopped. But if your first investment is through XYZ LLC and you need money later at the B, you can do that. It also gives you early liquidity that people will never see if you want to take early liquidity in these deals as well.
Yeah, I would say there's interest at the LP level like never before for direct exposure into companies that seem to be doing well. And that creates an opportunity for VCs and also a bit of a challenge, because sometimes you have, I've got 4 institutional investors that all want co-invest co-invest opportunities, and I don't want to play favorites, and it's challenging to navigate sometimes.
I guess we're out of time. Do we have time for questions, or not really?
We're out of time.
I'm sorry, we're out of time, everyone. But thank you very much for sitting tight for this panel.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Connie, thank you.